Hi, everyone. I'm so pleased to be with you, and I want to thank the Waterbury Chamber for inviting me to be part of this event. I'm going to share my screen with you so that we can go through the ways in which you can nail your remote interview. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen, and you should be looking at my logo right now. We are going to be talking about how you can nail your remote interview. And the first part of nailing the remote interview, which we're all doing now as opposed to interviewing live and in person, is to be sure that you are looking your best on screen. So let's take a look at how to do that. First of all, you want to be sure that you are looking at the camera and that the camera is at eye level. So for most of us, if our camera is on our laptop, it is at the top and in the middle of our screen. And what you probably are going to have to do is elevate your laptop, put it on some books so that it is at eye level. You don't want to be looking down and you don't want to be looking up. You want to be looking at right at eye level, parallel, have the camera parallel to where your eyes are. The second thing, and this is hard to do, it takes some practice, is that when you are speaking, you need to be sure that you're looking at the camera. Now, in a one-on-one interview, when it's just you and one other person, if your laptop is a little bit pushed back, you can actually even be looking at the screen shot of your interviewer, and they'll still feel like you're looking at them. When they're talking, you can absolutely look at them and then look up at the camera and look at them again. But when you are speaking, you want to be sure that you're looking right at the camera because that's what makes them feel that you're making eye contact with them. The next thing you want to do is be sure that you're being lit, that light is coming on you from in front of you. It's called being front lit. So right now, I have light coming on me from a window. Window light, natural light, is the best kind of light from which to be lit. That's not always possible. If you can't set your laptop or have yourself in front of a window, just put a lamp in front of your laptop. You may have to take the lampshade off so that you can get the most light possible. The more light on you, the better. The next thing you want to do is to sit in a dining room or kitchen chair. I would advise you not to be sitting in an office chair. Office chairs are designed to be ergonomically correct for somebody sitting for hours. And when we sit and we work at our computer, most likely our posture is not terrific. Our shoulders aren't usually back. We're not usually sitting up straight. And you want to be sure that you're sitting up straight for an interview. So there's two ways to do that. Number one, by sitting in a straight back chair. And number two, by sitting on the front half of the chair with both feet on the floor. That will give you your best possible posture and make you look your best in your interview. Next, your interviewer is going to understand that you're most likely interviewing from home. I don't want you to stress too much about this. Whatever is behind you is sort of your scenery. I'd prefer that you not use a virtual background. And the reason is because depending on your internet speed in your home and your camera and some other things, if you turn really quickly, your face can be cut in half. And it's really important in an interview that the interviewer can see your face. You absolutely positively do not want to have a virtual background that is, the Caribbean, because that's just odd. If it's just a plain white wall behind you, that's fine. A bookcase is great. whatever is behind you can be interesting. It should never be distracting, and it should never be messy. If your only option is that you're in your bedroom and they can see your bed, just make sure that your bed is made perfectly and it's so neat and spick and span that there's just absolutely nothing to look at. Remember, we really want the interviewer focused on us, not on what's behind us. You may have the impulse to read in your interview because you may be thinking that you want your answers to be perfect. You don't want to forget anything, you don't want to mess anything up. So you may be thinking that it's a good idea to read the answers that you've prepared for your questions. This is a bad, bad, bad idea. Why? Well, first of all, because I'm guessing that you're not a playwright or a screenwriter. So you can't write the way you speak. And when you read something that you've written, it's going to sound like you're reading. And reading is not what you would be doing in a live in-person interview. So it's absolutely not what you want to be doing in a remote interview. The idea of a remote interview is for it to mirror as closely as possible what it would be like to be live and in person. And I don't think you would be reading the answers to your interview in a live in-person interview. So please don't do it in a remote interview. Next, just like you would get to the site of a live in-person interview early, you want to be there in the Zoom room or the Microsoft Team room, the Google Hangout room. You want to be there before the interviewer. So, Zoom is free for 40 minutes, I believe. You can get on Zoom and see how you look, see how your background looks, make sure you're lit well enough. You can do all of that way ahead of time. I want you to be on the meeting, whatever it is, Google Hangout, any of the platforms. I want you to be there at least 10 minutes before your interview is scheduled to start. I want you to have your sound on. I want you to have your video on. I want you to be sitting there so that you see when the interviewer comes into the room, and you can have a smile on your face. You can be looking right at the camera and you can say, "Hi, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today. You are prepared, you're ready to go." Just like you wouldn't come screeching in to a live in-person interview 3 minutes before it started. You don't want to do it for a remote interview either. And for your sanity and calm as well. Get there early and be ready to roll. The most important thing you need to do in any interview, if it's on the phone, if it's remote via one of these remote platforms, or when we go back to being live and in person again, the most important thing you can do is to be yourself. And this can be hard sometimes, especially if you're in the beginning of your career or if you're interviewing, let's say, in a law firm and you haven't worked for a law firm previously and you're thinking to yourself, this law firm is 5 people's last names and it's been around since the Mayflower, and I think this is pretty buttoned up and serious and businesslike, professional. So I'm going to be this person that I'm not. Well, first of all, you're never going to be able to maintain that for any length of time. So that's not wise. And the other reason that's really equally, if not more important, that you want to be yourself is this. A big part of the interview process is for the interviewer to get to know you. And if they don't feel like they got to know you, they're not going to hire you. Your resume can look amazing. And if they don't feel like they got a sense of who you are, they're not going to take a chance on you, because it's not just about your skills and abilities, which we're going to be talking a lot about. It's also about them getting a feel for you and if you're going to be a good fit. And let's face it, doing this remotely makes it harder to discern that kind of thing. Now, I'm not saying that I want you to be your, relaxed, hanging out on the couch, watching football or watching the Real Housewives self. I'm talking about your professional self that is at ease, that is confident, and that wants the interviewer to get to know who you are. And the third reason for this is that even virtually, remotely, live and in person, a hybrid of those two, you know that you're going to be spending a lot of time at this job with other people. And you want to feel comfortable. You want to be sure this is a good fit for you as well. So, for those reasons, you want to be yourself in the interview. Now, let's talk about the interview itself. There are three components to any interview, and they are these. It is you, the person being interviewed, it is the interviewer, and it's what you want to tell the interviewer about you. So as you think about what you want the interviewer to know about you, it's critically important that you think with an eye toward the interviewer. And this is one of my bespeak isms, which is to turn your focus 180 degrees. And what I mean by that is that it's critically important for you to sit yourself in the interviewer's seat and think to yourself, okay, what is this interviewer looking for? What does the job description say about this position? What are the skills? What are the abilities? What are the must-haves? I also want to think about, is this a new position? Am I replacing someone? Am I going to be part of a team? Am I going to be working alone? Is this a big company, a small company? Is this an international company, a local company? All of those things are going to inform what you want to tell the interviewer about you. It's based on what, once you've put yourself in the interviewer's seat and thought about them and what they're looking to hear, that's when you start gathering what you want to tell the interviewer about you. So let's talk about that. When you tell the interviewer about yourself, it's going to follow this format. And I say that in quotes because I lay it out as a flow chart, but it's not a flow chart. So my apologies to those of you who are architects or engineers, people who are used to legit project managers, people who are used to legit flow charts. I don't know the correct shapes for a flow chart, so I just use these because I like them. So please don't be offended. So before I even get to that, when you're thinking about stories you're going to tell about yourself, you're going to tell two kinds of stories. You're going to tell stories about problems that you solved or your team solved, your department solved, you solved as a group, and goals that you achieved, goals that your team achieved, your department achieved, your company achieved, that you played a role in. This is what makes the business world go round: solving problems and achieving goals. So as you think about those things, and by the way, these are not just things that you did in your career, in your professional career. These are absolutely things that you did in volunteer jobs. If you run the church choir, if you coach a soccer team, a baseball team, a football team, if you run a team for Habitat for Humanity every year, if you, I'm trying to think of another example, if you have worked with scores, anything that was volunteer is a legitimate undertaking. Just because you didn't get paid for it doesn't take away its legitimacy. In fact, in my opinion, it can give it even a higher elevation because you weren't getting paid for it. You did it out of the goodness of your heart. You did it because of a passion that you have. And that's always a great thing to show. So, thinking about now the big universe of problems you've solved in your life, goals that you've achieved in your life, it is going to look something like this. It's going to be obviously talking about you, whether you did it alone or as part of a team. It's going to be talking about the goal that you set for yourself, your team set, your company set, or a problem that needed to be solved. What the solution was to that problem, and then what the result was of implementing that solution. And keep in mind that as we all know, it's not always a straight road from thinking about the goal to be achieved or the problem to be solved, coming up with the solution and solving the problem with a great result. We all know that there are lots of times, it's probably much more likely that we try something as a solution and it doesn't quite work. So we go back to the drawing board, put our thinking caps on, think of another solution, try that one. Maybe that one doesn't work either. Now we got to go back to the drawing board again. We think big outside the box, get ourselves together, try the solution again, and lo and behold, this time we succeed. Can be stories like that that you are going to tell. Speaking of which, the way we are going to talk about our achievements, the problems we've solved, and the goals that we've achieved is through stories. We are going to tell our interviewer probably multiple stories. And the great thing about a story is, number one, everyone loves a story. Whether you're 3 or 93, you love listening to a story. And number two, stories are really easy for people to retell. So when you tell your interviewer a story that, by the way, proves you can do the skill or the ability that's in the job description, they then can go and tell that story to the person for whom you're going to be working or the person to whom they report. So we want to back up what we say we can do with stories. Stories have 3 parts. They have the beginning, which is the setup of what the goal is that we're trying to achieve or the problem is that we're trying to solve. They have a middle, which is about how we went about solving that problem. And then they have an end, which is the result of implementing the solution. And every story needs all 3 of these parts in order to be a well-crafted story. Let me share with you some mistakes in storytelling that I don't want you to do when you're in your interview. So here are a big 3 for me. The first one is what I call the revolving door. And this kind of storyteller tells you the beginning, they tell you the goal, tells you the middle, the solution, tells you the end, the result, then they go back and tell you the beginning again. Then they tell you the middle again. Then they tell you the end again. Then they go back to the beginning. They're in this revolving door of telling the story over and over and over until you want to pull them out of the revolving door because you now could tell the story in your sleep. Only tell your story once and be done. The next kind of bad storytelling is the road to nowhere. And you probably know somebody who tells a story like this. And I put story in air quotes because it's not a story. So I have a very dear friend who tells stories like this, and she'll start talking, and I'm listening, and I'm trying to listen for the beginning of the story. So I think she's talking, and I think, there's the beginning of the story. And then she talks some more, and I realize, no, that part wasn't the beginning of the story. Maybe this is the beginning of the story. And then she talks some more and talks some more and stops talking, and if we're on the phone, we hang up, and there just went 20 minutes of my life, and I have no idea what the whole thing was about. Your story has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Speaking of having an end, this is the third kind of storytelling don't. And that is the story that tells us what the problem or goal was, tells us what the solution was that was implemented, but forgets to tell us how it all turned out. And that leaves us hanging. That's why I call it the cliffhanger. We're left wondering, we're left with this big question mark over our heads thinking, okay, but did it work? What happened? So be very careful not to simply tell your solution and assume that your interviewer knows that it was successful, because we don't. We don't know that your solution was successful until you tell us. And by the way, this is not always possible, and it does not always have to be the case. But if you have the kind of story that had a result, that where you could define it in a metric, we experienced 20% growth in, we experienced 10% reduction of, that's even better. It is not always possible, and it is not always necessary, but when you can quantify your result, it's just that much stronger. I am obsessed with words. Words are really important. Words can help us, and they can hurt us. So I want to share with you some words and phrases that I want you to avoid using, and words and phrases that I want you to think about using. Let's first start with the ones I'd like you to avoid. So I call these weak, wishy-washy words. These words and phrases undermine the strength of your message. And in an interview, you don't want to do all this work to think up these stories about yourself and then undermine the story with these weak, wishy-washy words. The first one is try. No one pays us to try, right? Think about it. Back in the days when we were all flying, if I got on the airplane and heard the pilot come over the loudspeaker and say, "Welcome aboard flight 462, ladies and gentlemen, where we're going to try and get you to Dallas," I'd be unbuckling my seatbelt and making a beeline for the exit of the plane, because I didn't pay hundreds of dollars to hope to get to Dallas. No, we don't get paid to try. We get paid to do. Strive, by the way, is just the sneaky stepsister of try. It's the fancy way of saying strive. Take it out of your vocabulary. I want you absolutely to send a follow-up email to your interviewer. And by the way, I'd also like you to send a follow-up letter to your interviewer, note, a handwritten note. I do not want you to write in either of those, "Maybe you think I'm the best candidate for this position." Nor do I want you to write, "Hopefully you enjoyed our conversation yesterday." No, there's no hoping, there's no wishing, there's no Ouija board, there's no magic 8-ball. It's not. You're going to write, "I'm confident that I'm the best candidate for this position." There's no hoping, there's no maybe. Likewise, and this one is, I have to admit, this one is tougher to pay attention to and take out of our vocabulary. I'm guilty of using this word as well. And by the way, there are times when this word is legitimate to use in an interview, and I'll tell you when. If you sense that the interview is winding down and you didn't get a chance to tell the interviewer something about you, something about your skills and abilities that you excel at, then you can absolutely say, just one more thing before we end this Zoom call. I know on the job description it said candidate must be proficient in PowerPoint. I want you to know that in my last position, I created probably 100 PowerPoint decks a year, and I was the go-to person for PowerPoint. It's not even a story, it's just a short little statement proving that you're proficient, more than proficient at PowerPoint. So that's a good use of the word just. Where I don't want you to use the word just would be, I just want to say, I just want to thank you for taking the time to meet me yesterday. No, it's not just. How about thank you for taking the time to meet me yesterday? You don't need to say just, and you don't even have to say, I want to thank. Just say thank you. Much better, much stronger. These last two, sort of and kind of, none of us abused these two phrases. And then, I don't know, suddenly like 8 years ago, all of us started abusing these two phrases. You are not sort of a project manager. You're not kind of an engineer or an architect. I am not sort of a public speaking coach. I am not kind of a presentations consultant. You absolutely, positively should not be equivocal about any of that, which is what these two phrases do when you stick them into sentences where they have no business being. Sort of and kind of should only be used when you're describing something and you need an analogy to explain it. Analogies start with it's like. So it could be, it's sort of like when you run your dishwasher. It's kind of like the way paper clips link together. I'm coming off these totally off the top of my head. Those are times when you can use sort of and kind of. When you're explaining something to the interviewer that's complicated, that he or she might not be familiar with, then it's great to use an analogy that, as I say, a 3-year-old or a 93-year-old would understand. So then you're sure that the interviewer is understanding what you're trying to tell him or her. But do not insert sort of and kind of in your sentences in places where they don't belong. Please. Let's take a look at some big, bold, brave words, some great words that I would love for you to be using. And by the way, I want you to feel free to think of lots of others, because there are tons of great words to use to express yourself and the way you feel about your work and aspects of your work and your skills and abilities. Excel, I just used it a minute ago. Where I truly excel is bringing people with different opinions to the table and helping them hear one another. And then I would tell a story about a time when I had two people or two groups of people that couldn't seem to get things done. I realized it's because they really weren't able to communicate. I brought them together. We talked, we heard one another. We came up with a to-do list, a plan to meet, and lo and behold, our project came in on time and on budget. Passionate. I am passionate about the user experience. I am eager to learn more about whatever company is you're interviewing with. I am determined to continue my career as a publicist, as a marketer, as a brander. I am laser focused on customer service. My success has been in the areas of. These are terrific words. And I know, I'm hoping that just listening to these, you're thinking of words of your own. Now, here's the thing. None of what I've just talked about will work unless you do this next thing, and that is to practice out loud. You must practice the answers to the questions that you think the interviewer is going to ask you out loud. In your head, thinking about the answer does not count. It does not count. I'm not saying it's not an important part of the process, but it is not going to get you there. I can promise you, you sound brilliant in your head. You sound like a genius in your head. Everything flows smoothly. When it starts coming out of your mouth, particularly the first time, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be a really bumpy road. And you don't want that to be happening in the interview itself. And the good news is, with the remote platform, you can get on you can get on Zoom with a spouse, a partner, a roommate. You can get on Zoom long distance with somebody across the country and schedule a 20-minute Zoom call with them, send them the list of questions, have them ask you the list of questions. You can record it so that you can evaluate yourself and also have them give you feedback. So there's absolutely positively no excuse for not being able to practice out loud. It is the thing that will make you exponentially more effective and more confident and less nervous. And speaking of less nervous, let me say one more thing. There's a big secret about interviewing that people don't think of. When you're in transition, when you're looking for a job, it's completely normal to feel that the interviewer has all the power because they're the person that has the job, right? And you desperately want the job. But here's the thing. The interviewer wouldn't be speaking to you if you didn't have something that they need, if they weren't looking for something that they need. And the thing they need is this. They need a person to do the work that is currently either not getting done at all or getting done by someone who has their own work to do, who is either not doing this work well or not doing their own work well or not doing either well. It's a mess. So your job in the interview is to convince the interviewer that you are the answer to their prayers. You are the person that can do this work in this environment with these people. That's what you have to offer. And guess what? When you do that effectively and you get hired and then you're doing the work and you're a superstar, you then make your interviewer look good. Because your boss is saying to the interviewer, way to go. This person is fantastic. So please keep that in mind. I'm going to wrap up. First of all, let's talk about how you can look and sound your best. Let's review. Number one, be lit from in front of you. The light should be coming from in front of you. Number two, think about what's behind you. It can be interesting, should never be distracting, should never be messy. Make sure you're looking at the camera and that the camera is at eye level, and do not read. No reading. No reading. Don't even give yourself the possibility of reading. You won't have to if you practice out loud. Lastly, three big things. Number one, when you start thinking about the stories that you want to tell, the things you want to say about yourself, Turn your focus 180 degrees and think about the interviewer and what he or she is looking for, what he or she needs to hear from you to be convinced that you are the best candidate for the job. Number two, be yourself. If they can't get an idea of who you are and the kind of fit you would be with others, they will not hire you. And lastly, practice your answers to these questions out loud. I don't want you to have them memorized so they come out the same way all the time. The important points should always be there, but the stories can come out a little bit different every time. I wish you the best of luck in this. I know you're going to be great. And I want to say to you, if you do all the things I'm suggesting, I know you will be great. Go get them.